So welcome everyone. Walaliuk for joining us today for this second session of the Dal Climate Lecture Series. I just want to start by acknowledging that we're here in Chibuktuk in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people. And I know many of you were here with us a few weeks ago with our incredible team talking about Netagalumk. All of our work needs to be rooted in the land and in the stewards of this land. And I'm just, continually committed to learning what it means to be a treaty person and to really opening my second eye and really applying an Indigenous lens to all of our climate work. So we're very grateful to be here today. And I'm just gonna hand it over to my colleague and fearless leader, Shannon Miedema.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just going to welcome you today on behalf of both Dalhousie University and the Halifax Regional Municipality. Dr. Graham Gagnon will be joining us. Oh, he's here. Hello. You made it in time. I don't know if you're good to just speak later or if you want to actually say hi. Dalhousie and HRM kind of got together, and Dalhousie, it was Graham who proposed the idea of this public lecture series focused on climate change, climate solutions, major themes emerging around climate space, and we were super excited to partner on this. And the first session was amazing. I know a lot of you were there. If you missed it, it is recorded, and is it on the website? It will be soon, so you can take it in. They'll all be recorded and online. We're really excited for this session as well. It's really about galvanizing support across all of you amazing people that are, whether you're students, whether you're working in climate change, whether you're just interested in what you can do to be part of the solution. I think it's really important for us to raise our collective understanding of what we're facing, get strength from each other in the challenging times that we're in, and really build ourselves up with some of the really positive, optimistic progress that we're making while still understanding that we are in a major crisis and we need to move really urgently and creatively towards solutions. So thanks for being here, and I'll pass it over to Graham for a second.
Well, thank you, Shannon, and thank you everyone here for giving up some of your professional time to be here to talk about action and how we address the climate crisis. This week, I'm looking at Sarah. Sarah and I were at a roundtable for the environment meeting with the minister, where we were getting debriefed around carbon tax and solutions around hydrogen, and we both kind of whispered to each other that we really need to focus on solutions and focus on action at this moment. And I was really pleased as the Dean of Architecture and Planning to work with HalifACT, thinking about the built environment and the city we live in, the province we live in, and how we can develop corrective measures. So I really look forward to the next few hours, and we'll pass it over to Sarah to facilitate and engage. Again, thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you so much. And I think Shannon's just gonna advance a couple slides for me. Thanks, Shannon. So again, we have 4 lectures in this series, and I think when we started talking about doing this, I really, as a person who's working on climate engagement, have the feeling that it's really important to hear from very smart people, but it's also really important, there is so many smart people in this room, and it's really important for us to hear from each other and build relationships with each other. It's like there's this kind of feeling of this is a web that needs to do something really big together, and so part of this is about growing a sense of community. And then, really this feeling I've been saying in shorthand, it's like, how do we talk to others about climate, and how do we talk to ourselves about climate? And so it's really this kind of feeling of how are the people in our community, including us, responding to the messages, and what is gonna help us feel like we can move to action. And so we have 3 really different perspectives on this. Unfortunately, Nancy Blair, who's a climate psychologist who I think had a lot of really interesting things to share, was not well today, so we have a slightly smaller but no less wonderful panel. And then just if you're coming for the next couple, the next session is next week, and we're talking about climate in the built environment. We know both in terms of decarbonization and in terms of climate preparedness, in terms of adaptation, buildings are a huge leverage point in the work that we need to do together. And so we have some really exciting speakers who are sort of pioneers in that field who are going to share perspectives. And then our final session is, I think this, for me, the really million-dollar question is the kind of this multi-level climate leadership that's coming from all different sectors, all different levels of government, all different parts of society. And we need kind of transformative shift in how we work together if we're going to move as quickly as we need to move. And so we have some really smart people who are going to talk about that. And so for today, just again, maybe I don't need to do this. I think I already did this. I think I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over to Sarah. And go ahead. Yeah, I was going to introduce you. I'm going to introduce you, but I'm not right at the spot in my notes. So Sarah Riley is the Chief Strategy Officer at R&G Strategic, a woman-founded and led communications and design consulting agency. Sarah's work and R&G's mission focuses on using storytelling to engage communities in clean energy, climate tech, and environmental and social good. Her work places her at the intersection of branding, technology, sustainability, and communication design to advocate for a better world. Thank you, Sarah.
What a great intro, thank you. And hey, everyone, and you're all kind of concentrated over there. Sorry I'm over here at this podium, but it's Paul O'Regan Hall, so I was so excited to make slides because it's such a great room for slides and AV. So you can expect some sound and visuals from me today. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. And I want to start by playing you an audio clip, actually. It was a Saturday morning, and it wasn't a typical one because it was the morning after Hurricane Fiona. And a vulnerable senior who was in a wheelchair, living in Antigonish, living alone, she phoned in to the CBC, and I just want to play you that call.
Had to spend a lot of the storm in the bathroom. What happened?
Well,
And you said that you had to spend a lot of the storm in the bathroom. What happened?
the winds were 146 kilometers here. There was no power. I was in the dark, but I have an 8-foot wide window in my bedroom, and debris started hitting it. And then I went into my living room, and debris was hitting that window. And then I went into the front of my house, and debris was hitting my front glass door. I spent 7 hours sitting in my wheelchair in my bathroom with the door closed with CBC radio on and a solar light. I never want to live through that night again.
So that's still really hard to hear, actually. I get so clumped when I hear that. So we all got up that morning, we all found our batteries and we put them into our radios, and some of us probably in the room actually heard Ann Camosi, and she's being interviewed by Mary Catherine McIntosh. And it was powerful, and I wanted to share that clip for just a couple of reasons. The first is because I hope this is going to dispel any lingering doubt that Canadians are unaware about the threats of climate change or the effects of climate change, because they are increasingly so. And okay, so I say this for the meteorologists in the room, if there are any. Weather, of course, isn't climate, but Anne's harrowing call to the CBC was just one of many that drew those connections. And Nova Scotians really may not see how climate change connects to things like health, their food, their livelihoods, or other parts of their daily lives, but I promise you, they understand the environmental effects. Awareness of climate change is pervasive now in Canada. It's real. It's on people's minds. Denial is kind of relegated to Twitter trolls and maybe the odd ExxonMobil executive. We don't need to create awareness that climate change is happening. Climate change is now communicating itself. It's telling its own story. So we need to shift that narrative to focus on the solutions. And for today, let's just concentrate on two outsized decarbonization problems, the ones that we're trying to solve. And there's an asterisk here, by the way, because I have to emphasize that these numbers are from 2019. And if there is anyone in the room, and I'm sure there is, who is at the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, thank you so much for the work you're doing to create new baseline data and on that climate plan, which I hope is coming soon. Can't wait to see it. Thank you. But electricity, the grid, and transport in this province. So when it comes to electrical generation, Abacus data actually polled Canadians in 2020, and they found support for climate solutions and clean energy, a whole transition, is a widely accepted concept. More than 70% of Canadians actually say it isn't just necessary, it's inevitable, and they want to engage in a conversation about a transition away from fossil fuels. And Nova Scotians trend with all Canadians on this. More than that, over 75% of us here in this province want more renewable energy. And if we look a little bit closer at Nova Scotians specifically in the support that they have for these solutions, you can see we're really bought in, right? Take note for rooftop solar folks or utility scale solar folks, you have a very envious number up there. On transport, RNG actually conducted a research report in 2019, really attempting to get to the heart of what Nova Scotians consistently think and feel about the value of EVs specifically, but electric mobility, and what might pique their curiosity or drive them towards this option. And you can download this on our website, by the way. But many of these trends actually haven't changed since 2019. They haven't changed that much in 4 years at all. And the main takeaway is people are very interested, and they want information. So I just showed you some very data and content-heavy slides. Everyone's still with me? In all seriousness, climate solutions, this popular with Nova Scotians, where's the disconnect? Why aren't we enthusiastic when we see those data-heavy slides? When asked about the cause of climate change, Canadians still refer to the ozone hole. And the most common solution given in focus groups is recycling. Not solar, not offshore wind, despite their popularity. So it turns out we actually don't understand what causes climate change, and we don't understand what to do about it. Remember the 45% of Nova Scotians who are passively concerned? Yes, they care, but it turns out they can't make this connection because they're unclear of how energy efficiency, hydro dams, electric mobility, or even carbon pricing. And I know you guys have seen the comment sections, right? How does carbon pricing even fix this problem? So what's worse, they're not doing anything about this because they really don't know what to do about it. And I'm talking about that movable middle of 45% of people. And it's no wonder because you all fell asleep looking at a graph earlier. So sharing stats or figures won't change someone's mind. And this may be a controversial statement because I know how important it is, but emphasizing a 1.5 degree limit or picturing carbon equivalencies, those things won't do it either. Science-backed stories are great. They're great for scientists and analysts and policymakers. But do they work on everyday people? Turns out if you want to change hearts, not just minds, the only thing that can do that is a good story. Which brings me back to Anne Kamosi. What are the elements of a good story? Besides a villain and a happily ever after, which is at stake, we already have those things. Couple of key pillars here, 3 to be precise. First, a peer delivers the message. People filter information through a lens of their own values, their worldviews, their identity, their emotions, and research consistently proves that peers with alignment on these criteria are the most influential messengers. So the messenger is almost 99% key to success here, and greatly influences how people respond. So when you engage people early and often to create a two-way dialogue, you want communities to be able to see themselves in the messenger. Second, build trust by showing. Don't tell. Use plain language. and examples people can touch, feel, experience. And finally, and perhaps this point should be first above all, it's about fairness. Nova Scotians hold fairness as an incredibly strong intrinsic value. Why shouldn't polluters pay? If a wind farm goes up, why shouldn't the community hosting it get something back for it? So the folks from Clean are in the room today. They worked on this amazing, amazing program. And we helped them design this Next Ride and EV Assist, all the parts and components of an electric mobility campaign in this platform. And they can actually tell you the up-to-date numbers, so please talk to them after. But in 2020 and 2021, Next Ride took almost 500 Nova Scotians on test drives. And almost 1,000 folks had a firsthand electric mobility experience. And that's during a pandemic. And it's not counting all the impressions and likes and engagements they had. So what's successful about this? Nova Scotians talking to Nova Scotians across the province. Not just test drives, but up-to-date info on chargers and availability, and rebates. Policy delivered great rebates to make the investment affordable, to take some of that pressure off. So, cost sharing. The government chipping in. And of course, drives were free. You just sign up for them. So this was so successful that Electric Mobility Canada has said it's the model that other provinces should follow. And the other reason I wanted to play that clip from Ann Kamosi on the last point, fairness. If you take away one thing from this talk today, it's this. We do care so much about fairness. Why should someone older, living alone, navigating the world in a wheelchair, suffer more than the rest of us because of the effects of climate change? Ann's call was gut-wrenching. It grabbed listeners. It was more than a good story. It was a clarion call from Nova Scotian a neighbor in Antigonish whose home we can probably all picture, and we can feel what she went through. And we can do that because we saw it. We saw Fiona happen firsthand. So Mary Catherine McIntosh is a good friend of mine, so I gave her a call yesterday when I was preparing for this talk. And I wanted to know, whether she had gotten any reaction to that interview on the radio. It played here and it played on The Current, and she thinks probably more than 2 million people heard it. And she says many, many folks reached out to her directly and wrote to her directly asking her about it. And I'm almost positive Anne heard from many, many more. So I hope I'm honoring her as an advocate and a storyteller when I say, it was important what she did. And in October, there was a lot of press and traction from her story, and the idea of a vulnerable persons registry has actually created some traction with policymakers and the public. And Anne had everything to do with that. So I leave you with this. Climate change no longer needs us to tell its story. It's the solutions that need our storytelling support. So what will you in this room share about our clean transition? Because I urge you to look around and connect with each other and talk to other people in the province and talk to each other today, because I believe that the storytellers and change agents are here in the room. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Sarah. So we're going to hear from each speaker, and then we're going to have a little time talking to each other, and then we're going to have a sort of engagement with the panel. So I am going to hand it to Louise now. And Louise Adongo is a bold and grounded leader with 10 plus years experience in systems change, policy, and evaluation. She brings care and intention to uncovering the roots of tangled problems, thus enabling shifts in greater resilience, sustainability, and impact. Louise integrates her STEM background, expertise in alternative engagement strategies, and design thinking approach to drive equity-based social change. And I'm a longtime fan of Louise, and I'm so happy that you're here with us, so thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your presentation. As you were sharing, I was reminded of I lost my roof and had personal things I was dealing with myself during Hurricane Fiona, so missed the stories as they were coming up. But like a few weeks later, heard the really sad, tragic story of the person in Dartmouth that they had to break into the building to get to them, and they were freezing. And I do hope we capture the stories of experiences that people experienced during Hurricane Fiona, because something feels very different about this. I wasn't living in Nova Scotia during Hurricane Juan, and I think I came to visit the day after White Juan, and something is very different about the way the experience of Hurricane Fiona was, or maybe we're getting better at telling, getting the stories out there. I don't know what it is, but I hope that we document them in a different way, because the stories and the individual stories really matter. I took a few notes to remind me as talking points of what I wanted to say as you were talking. So I just wanted to say out loud something around making connections. Really stood out to me, so I'll go through that. Sarah's comment on smart people was something I wanted to talk about, and then just the fairness as an intrinsic value is really something I'm curious about, and how it extends to competing crises for some over others. So I think I'll go back and say, as the executive director of Inspiring Communities, we participated in a climate change cohort through the Tamarack Institute. And when we signed up for it, our intention, and Trina Morton, who's here in the room, Trina, give a wave to everyone, led our participation in that cohort. We really saw that the climate conversation, for lack of a better way to say it, has really been led by and advocated for, and activists have been subject matter experts and people that really understand the data and the research, and the voices of community members and the perspectives of community members and residents really got lost in the shuffle of all that. And so we wanted to participate in that to see how we could do something around that. And what became kind of apparent as the months progressed, it was a year-long engagement that started in January, was the hesitation or the reluctance, and sometimes very understandable, to bring in the community members and the community voices. Conversations that we would have with our cohort members ourselves, let alone across, there was 19 groups across Canada, was how do you frame the discussion so that community members feel like they understand what they're engaging in to participate.
I wonder if you can just put, I'm having a hard time hearing, so I think if you just
put it much closer.
You almost have to feel like
literally like this? Okay, sorry, I eat the microphone. Yeah, so what is the ask if you're going to invite citizens and residents? There was questions about who do you include and who do you not include. There was people that said, well, we're in our communities, we are community members. So I just raised that to say that it is an interesting question that I ask myself, and I ask you today to consider, even just now, take a minute. Who's sitting on either side of you? Who is in this room? Why are you in this room? Who is not in this room that should be in this room? What is happening in their lives? And how do we take this conversation out of spaces like this to listen to the stories of the people who are not represented here? And I probably have more questions than answers. I have a few thoughts on what some of the answers are, but just wanted to frame it that way. And then I'll start at the end of what I was going to say and then go back to the beginning. Speaking of Hurricane Fiona, one of the things that I would really love to see in municipalities and towns is an equity lens on the crisis response, on recovery, an equity lens and framework on all the incentives and all the rebates and all the tools and supports available on how and who is eligible and how they can be limiting. And then a conversation around in rebuilding what is the opportunity for green solutions. For example, I'm in a situation where I have to replace my roof. I know to reach out to roofers, and the offer is shingles or a metal roof, but there's no material on the choices to make and which ones are greener and not greener, as a very practical example. So just going back to the beginning about making connections, the stories that we share, meaningful and deep and impactful, there are other stories. There are longer term stories, and I think of Indigenous communities that have been talking about the impact to them of climate before even the ozone, and those stories maybe were not listened to or centered or empathized with in the same way. And so just wandering around story through time and experiences of community members, how do we integrate and include them in this long conversation that we're having about climate? I woke up this morning and I just caught the tail end of CBC again, and someone was saying, we're in the place of, we don't even have time. Like, the federal government is finally talking about adapting an adaptation strategy, which they should have been talking about 10 years ago. Like, and there's people who've been talking about impacts to climate for them more than 30, 40 years ago. So just curious about whose story and in what way. And I say this when I think of Dr. Ingrid Waldron and the work that's been done in the South Shore on environmental racism. And I don't know how many, I've known both Louise, Dalhousie, and Dr. Ingrid Waldron for a long, long, long time. And I know some people who the very first time they even knew what this was because of the Elliot Page documentary. So I kind of link that to the conversation about fairness and intrinsic value. And I'm not saying anything that isn't necessarily new. I think the Ivany report covered how we are good at compartmentalizing our lives and our stories, and there are some things over which we see the fairness, and then there's some other things that we don't necessarily. Trino is from North End Halifax in Uniacke Square. Climate and the intersectionality around health and transportation, those things are very, very real and very felt in that community that is going through gentrification once again. I say once again because many of the people that live there are former Africville residents. Where would they move to if they got displaced? That would mean that they would have access to transit routes if they do not have vehicles. So I share this to say that the stories are intersecting and interconnected, but they're uncomfortable to consider because they require us to face aspects of our humanity that we might not be comfortable facing. And this was something in a panel that we had at the end of the climate action cohort in Tamarack that we discussed. I was on the panel, a counselor from Prince Edward County in Ontario, and somebody from Canmore, that there is something particular about the discomfort of talking about climate itself, and then systemic inequality issues, and then you add on, I have compassion for why it is difficult to wade into, but I guess my positionality on this panel is to say, and we can't afford not to. We need to be uncomfortable and do it anyway, because there are stories still missing from Hurricane Fiona. There are people who didn't get to call into CBC. There are people who may not have insurance to be able to have coverage for the recovery that they need, people who are struggling with food insecurity and housing affordability even before this, who are in much more dire straits, and we don't even know their stories yet. I wanted to share a little bit I want to talk about flooding and environmental racism and share another anecdote, although I guess I don't know if it's an anecdote or not, but there was an engagement by the municipality in Truro, and I don't bring up the municipal examples because I'm picking on municipalities and towns. I am actually specifically bringing them up because municipalities and towns are the parts of government that citizens interact with the most. And so I would argue, and I think others have said, is the greatest leverage point for how we can do things different. So when you get into your tables and you're talking, and I say this because the smart people often come up with the federal policies and the provincial policies and larger scale, and absolutely I understand the potential impact of those shifts in terms of policy and regulations and other tools and instruments. but the municipalities and towns is where citizens engage with the most. And so what can we do there, and how can we look at which residents receive what information and what supports and tools in what time frame? So what I was going to share was somebody invited Lynn Jones to a panel to talk about probably more than flood risk, but the response that Lynn gave was in relation to flood risk. And this was, it would have been sometime last year, because it was after a panel that had been done at Dalhousie around how to interact with the African Nova Scotian community. And Lynn wrote back, and it was really gracious that Lynn wrote back, because there are many people who just wouldn't. And Lynn said, "Thank you for inviting me to come and speak about this issue that you want me to come and speak to. The difficulty for me is what you're identifying that you want to address. Members of my community told you about 30 years ago. And nothing was done, and they moved, and I'm the only one left. So while I appreciate that you're inviting me to this conversation, it is painful and 30 years too late." I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what Lynn said. And so I just want to ask us to consider that. And what does that mean for what we think about as solutions? And who has been asking for solutions and have not been interacted with in a way that is meaningful and beneficial through time, and is at risk of being ignored once again as we get to solutions? And what do we do about that? And how do we consider that? And how do we make space for that, even if it makes us feel uncomfortable? Just one last thing, I promise. So, smart people, wise people in generations of change. This is going to be controversial. I think we've heard enough from the smart people. I think the smart people need to maybe do some listening. I'm seeing people are nodding, so thank you. I appreciate. I went out on that ledge. You didn't leave me out there on my own. There is wisdom that we are desperately needing and missing out on because we're crowding the space with the smart people. We, as you said, don't need to be convinced anymore. We don't need the smart people to show us any more numbers, show us any more data. I mean, we always will need it. Maybe we need different data, more contextual data, intersecting data. I just pulled up, Sarah, the stuff I shared with you, right? Around social connection and mental health and climate crises. We need to start to talk about this or listen differently and listen to new voices and listen to wise wisdom and hear how people are navigating outside of the solutions that we might come up with, because there will always be people that will fall through the cracks. So I want to end on that and pass it on to Noel, and maybe give everybody like a minute to breathe. Sorry to lay a heavy on you. But I think this is the room where we can take it. We wouldn't have come into this conversation if we weren't here knowing that we do need to do something, and we need to include all of us, not some of us, for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise, so much. And I'm just telling you, as sure lots of other people are, the like wheels of my mind and heart are turning, and I'm like, all kinds of ideas are popping up, and I'm really excited to continue to stay in relationship and in this conversation with you. So I'm going to invite Noel to speak. Noel is a longtime friend of mine and someone that I respect profoundly. He's a school teacher, a meditation instructor, and an author. He grew up in the Shambhala Buddhist community. He began practicing meditation when he was 12 and has trained in a variety of contemplative arts, including Japanese archery, flower arranging, and calligraphy. He has been teaching meditation to various audiences for almost over 20 years. Noel teaches middle and high school English and history and has served as the head teacher as well as the, Dean of Mindfulness at the Shambhala School. I lost the end of that sentence, for 20, almost 20 years. So welcome, Noel. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Louise and Sarah. I feel like we already heard so much in such a short amount of time. I'm kind of processing it all. But this morning I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of global climate emergency and how it's affecting young people. And kind of along the lines of what Sarah was saying about how we don't have to create awareness that climate change is happening because it's speaking for itself. Someone who grew up in the 80s, I kind of, when I started teaching, I felt like my role was to wake people up to the reality of there actually is struggle and pain in the world. And it was like, everything's actually not all promised, you know, kids. And if I did that, then they would respond and they'd be like, oh, we have to do something. That was kind of my basic assumption when I started teaching, and that was the approach I brought when I started teaching in the beginning, and quickly realized that things had shifted to where young people from earlier and earlier ages are already assuming doom and kind of waking them up to like things are actually bad wasn't seemingly very helpful. It kind of was just layering in this kind of sense of despair. So you're probably aware that mental health challenges among children and teens has been increasing drastically in the last few years. And I don't have statistics on that particularly, but I don't really need them because I work with young people every day. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what I've been seeing. And I work with primarily middle school and high school students, so that's my lens mostly. And as I was reflecting on this, I sort of thought of three levels of experience that seem to be kind of pervasive among young people. And the first kind of outer level, what you experience with teens currently is this kind of big shield. It's a kind of, the way that young people present themselves more these days is kind of, it's very guarded. There's a shield of kind of distance. And that definitely increased for a year or so of wearing masks. In the classroom, I experienced a kind of feeling of like interaction was considered highly optional. It was very easy to opt out of interacting. So there was a sudden feeling of like I was used to talking to people and suddenly I was alone on a stage in a room of cold stares. So kids are kind of dwelling in this realm of distance and sort of superficial distraction. You know, they've got a lot of things to occupy themselves with TikTok and YouTube and video games and devices. And within that culture, there's a kind of peer orientation. So things are increasingly coded, sort of generationally coded. So they speak a language of symbols and language that only they understand. And if you don't know what I mean, just try watching a few TikTok videos. And, you know, if you're anything like me, you're like, what even is this? Like, why would you ever want to look at that? But seemingly it's perpetually fascinating. And then connected with that is this feeling of kind of alienation and distrust, distance, and scorn for older generations. And, you know, this is a bit of an extreme example, but a couple of years ago, I tried talking to one of my high school classes about, like, how could we bridge this sort of increasing generation gap, this gap of communication between, you know, older generations and your generation. And one of the students replied, well, they should just hurry up and die. And people didn't laugh, I mean, because it's not very funny, but it was just like, you know, they didn't really have much else to say. It was pretty dark. So, so there is this, you know, there is a gap there. There's this kind of frightening quality of a gulf between generations, and then how are they doing within that gulf where they're sort of living in their isolated culture. So that's kind of the outer shield part. And I wrote down, solution does not equal attack. So tends to be for you know, older generations, teachers, parents, whatnot, we kind of think we have to convince them, like, TikTok has no worth. You know, get off your devices. This is all stupid, don't you see? And education around that is important, but it doesn't tend to be very helpful. Actually, like, it's really important to respect young people and what they're interested in. And if you want to build a bridge, you have to go towards them. You can't only demand that they come towards you. So, you know, learning what TikTok is, you know, stuff like that, starting to learn a little bit of the language, it goes really a long way. But in any case, what's just beneath that first outer shield is this other layer of experience, which is a kind of well or morass of despair and grief and anxiety and depression. You know, I think that the world of that we live in and kind of the way it impacts our psychology really is one place where the trickle-down theory is real. And young people suffer tremendously from the messaging and the realities of the world that they're inheriting. And this sense of kind of emptiness or nihilism is very common among young people. It's interesting, last year I was talking to some students about, you know, what their thoughts about spirituality and religion were, and even when I started teaching, you know, most students had some kind of religious connection of some kind in their families, and whether they had doubt or not about it, it was sort of a part of their culture. And now, not so much. Most of them basically identify themselves as kind of materialists, in the sense of, like, they just believe in material reality. And, you know, it's just like there's just stuff in the universe. And I was talking to their science teachers and saying, like, this is what they feel. And the science teachers were shocked, because they're like, oh, well, we teach science, but we still believe in magic and meaning in the universe. And so that's interesting as well. So then there's a kind of third level. And when we look at this one, I'd like to kind of suggest that the first two turn out to not be real. I mean, they're real in the sense that they function, but they're not really at the heart of who these young people are. it turns out they're just two levels of kind of shields. So what are they hiding under there? And really the whole story, or the essential story, is something we have to dig a little deeper to find. And what it is love and connection. And really, as humans, from the start, we love life. We love being in the world. We love the world. And we can become disconnected from that, but really we love, we just love, and we're connected. We are nature, so we love nature. And we're connected to nature. Even saying we're connected to nature isn't quite it. Like, we are nature. So when we connect back to that level of love and connection, we restore our kind of well-being. We restore a sense of strength. So, kind of going back, I kind of forgot to mention this, but when we look at this kind of second level where we have all these health challenges and mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, and so forth, I meant to mention the solution there, which really is attack. So like I said, the first solution's not attack. The next solution is attack, in the sense of, like, young people really need more support. They really need more support for their well-being. And then on the level of this deepest level of, like, who we are, the solution is really trust. We have to assume that that's existent and fully intact in ourselves and in the young people we interact with. And in order to summon that out, we kind of have to learn the ceremonies of trust. Whatever those ceremonies are, what do those look like? Because it comes out. It's never far away, because it's inherently there. So, yeah, when we kind of touch back to that basic level, then the question of whether or not to respond to the world, to be involved in work that helps the world, becomes less questionable, kind of conceptual. It's not really even a question. It's just obvious, because it's coming from love and coming from a sense of, that's me, essentially. It's like if someone tosses a hammer at you, you don't kind of like have an ambivalent reaction. Or you don't kind of like, whatever, wonder what's on TikTok. It's like, oh, you just react. And that takes that sense of, like, identification and reality. So really the only way that we can tap into that level of depth with youth, the only way is for us to begin with ourselves, because we're the same. All those levels exist for us too. Some of the language and the content is different, but it's all the same. And we have to discover that love and connection for ourselves. And in order to get there, we have to learn how to experience the rough waters of our mind and our emotions. And as Louise was saying, we have to learn how to hang out with discomfort. And those are kind of the thresholds that we have to work with in order to sink into that deeper level. And that's what bravery is. And the only way to teach that is to embody it. You can't just explain it to people. You have to be it, because it's transmitted through relationship and through interaction and through example. And to me, there's just really nothing else that is important to teach. So thank you.
Thank you, Noel. And I think we have one more little part of Noel's exercise, and just given where the timing is, I want to invite people who are sitting in the audience to come in and join a table. If you're sitting at a table by yourself, maybe, I think like tables of 3 are great, tables of 4 are fine. We did, it was interesting, 110 people registered, so now we know. And in that transition, if anyone else wants to like grab a coffee, feel free, but we're gonna just start again in like 5 minutes, so, yeah.
I just texted it.
So just an invitation to grab your coffee and your snack and come and sit at a table. Okay, great. So yeah, if you can have a seat, we're gonna just continue. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. Hi, I have to leave to go to another meeting, but Trina Morton is going to sub in and can answer the questions that you ask, because a lot of the sentiments I expressed, Trina shares and might even be able to go deeper on. So thank you so much. If anyone is looking for me or wants to follow up or has any questions, my email address is ladongo, ADONGO, @inspiringcommunities.ca. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
And Trina can pass it on as well.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to pass it back to Noel for a minute, and then we're going to go to the tables for a little bit, and then we're going to have some time for Q&A with the speakers.
So I'm going to invite you to do a short exercise, and if you'd like to do this journaling, that works well, but if you don't want to journal or don't have a journal, you can just do it kind of as a contemplation.
And people are also welcome to use the paper on the tables.
Oh yeah, great. So you can just write right on your table. So this is an exercise that comes from the work of Joanna Macy, who developed a thing called the work that reconnects, which is about developing resiliency and engagement and kind of coming from a place of love. And so we're just going to do the first step in that process, which is called coming from gratitude. And it's a really simple exercise that's about kind of creating a pathway to that quality of love and connection that I talked about. And it's not that we want to put aside our understanding or recognition of the problems and challenges that we face in our lives and in the world, but we don't really have that much, this group especially, not too much problem with that probably. So we can set those aside for a moment, knowing that they'll come back for us. And this is kind of more about creating a little channel to that deeper human place. So it's very simple. We're going to write with a prompt, or you can again just contemplate with this prompt. And the prompt is, things I love about the world include. And just say, write or think about anything that comes to mind, anything at all. Things I love about the world include. We're going to do this for about 3 minutes, so